2, 1.
Hello and welcome back live for our next session. Delighted to have a really good round table for you now. The title, Intelligent Transportation 2.0, and it's all around connecting vehicle architecture to smart city infrastructure. Our moderator is the wonderful Tyler Svitak, Executive Director from Colorado Smart Cities Alliance. Tyler, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Luke. And I am very excited to be sitting here with a number of distinguished panelists to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is how infrastructure is connecting to vehicles to improve all sorts of things in our transportation system, from lowering emissions to improving safety to improving efficiencies. But even though our infrastructure may be more connected than it has ever been and is very much moving in that direction, there's a whole lot of barriers to getting it fully connected in ways that can really benefit the everyday person. We're going to talk about everything that's happening in this space with these three panelists here today. We have Jim Eaton, the Associate Vice President of Solution Engineering at Wejo. We have Kevin Comstock, the Smart Cities Director for the City of Chattanooga. And we have Megan O'Callaghan, the Deputy City Manager at the City of Dublin. So first, we're going to let each of these panelists explain what they're doing in this connected vehicle infrastructure space. And then that will frame our discussion where I'll get to ask them some more pointed questions. First, we're going to start with Jim. Please introduce yourself, your organization, and what you're doing in the connected.
Thanks, Tyler, and it's a pleasure to talk to everybody today. So yeah, I'm Jim Eaton, AVP of Solutions Engineering here at Wejo. And firstly, a quick top line on Wejo essentially is a connected vehicle data vendor. Essentially, we take data direct from the OEM partners that we have. So there is no aftermarket device. There is nothing else implemented in the vehicle to get connectivity to these vehicles. And then we provide that to onward customers through various products and services that we have as a business. So a busy few months in the business, the last few months. So essentially we have had a US presence for quite some time now. We've started to move into Europe with our first OEM partner in Europe to provide our services there. We just launched Wejo Studio, which is our first platform as a service offering, whereby you can look at a couple of modules in there around intersection performance, origin to destination trends, elements of that nature. I guess the part of what I play in Wejo is in a couple of aspects. So I talk about with our partners, the ideation of how data could be used to support various use cases across various marketplaces, both public and private, to be clear on that. I also support in some of the technical enablement in order to how to get data to our customers and some of the education around that ultimately. And I think that's an interesting subject to talk about in this session as well today. And aside from that, then essentially I support some of our channel partnerships essentially in how to distribute our data further through incumbent technologies, let's say a city or municipality may have. So that's a little bit about myself, and I'll just pass on to the remaining of the speakers.
Thank you, Jim. And Kevin.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm Kevin Comstock. I'm the Smart Cities Director for the City of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we, for about 4 years now, have been engaged in a number of smart cities activities that, primarily from my background, are involved in transportation-related technologies. We've deployed 2 test beds in collaboration with a local university here, one in the urban core, and then we have a second one that we're working with one of the national laboratories on to kind of work on newer technologies and the research and development of those technologies and the interaction between my infrastructure, the traffic signal system, and motor vehicles and other users of that network. So it's been a pretty adventurous time and a constant learning curve. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. And Megan.
Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm excited to share the story of the Beta District. So I'm representing the Beta District, and it's a building region in central Ohio where the private sector, government, and academia work together in an open playground to safely test and deploy technology in real-world scenarios. Specifically, we're talking about an economic development area from Dublin and west through Marysville and up to East Liberty, which is where the Transportation Research Center, or TRC, is located. And we also have the 35-mile US 33 Smart Mobility Corridor that connects the three. The Beta District also reaches all the way down to Columbus, where we have Ohio State University, the Center for Automotive Research, and that makes an even larger smart mobility ecosystem. Back several years ago in 2014, the Northwest 33 Innovation Corridor Council of Governments, or the COG, which is made up of the cities of Dublin and Marysville and Union County, we all began meeting to discuss innovative ways to drive economic development across the region. And the conversation started with broadband and connecting businesses throughout the corridor. 2 years later, we won a highly competitive grant from the US DOT to outfit the region for connected vehicle testing. And that was just the beginning. There have been hundreds of millions of investment in the Beta District. And we have a long list of partners, including the Ohio Department of Transportation, Drive Ohio, US DOT, TRC, Honda, Battelle, OSU, various counties, and Smart Columbus. And we've partnered with global companies such as Deloitte. We have the world's leading design engineers like Honda, Michael Baker International, WSP, HNTB, and they're all doing work in the Beta District today. So up until this point, most of our focus has been on delivering the federal grant, but we've also created an ecosystem that's driving workforce and talent and recruiting companies. So we have an ideal environment for collaboration in the region. We already have many high-profile companies testing in the region. We also are partnering with academia. We have the Ohio University and the Ohio State University all located within the Beta District. And fortunately, what we have to offer, one of the things we have to offer is an ideal real-world environment for innovators. So we provide all-weather, four-season open testing in urban, suburban, and rural environments, which is pretty unique. And then within that environment, we have living labs, including the 33 Smart Mobility Corridor. Now we have 35-mile stretch of highway that includes the broadband and over 100 roadside units so that we can test all along the corridor. And then at one end, we have connected Marysville, which has every signalized intersection within that city connected and outfitted with smart mobility technology. So they are the first city in the US with all smart mobility technology at every signalized intersection in that city, which is pretty cool. Connected Dublin, we have over 20 intersections that are connected. We have a smart parking lot. We have our Dublink system, which is our 100 gig fiber infrastructure. We have lots of partner companies, and I could just go on, but we're happy to be here and tell our story today.
Amazing. Yeah, I think having real world deployment environments is critical to advancing this industry. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more with some questions here. So the first question is that, you know, I used to run the Connected Autonomous Vehicle program at CDOT, and we broke the connected vehicle space into two buckets, right? One that requires roadside or in-vehicle devices, or OBUs or RSUs. And then there's all sorts of applications that don't necessarily require that low latency communication and only need that network communication. And so what are your organizations focused on, either one or both, and why? And we'll start first, Kevin, with you.
Well, the City of Chattanooga was very fortunate to have the Electric Power Board here build a gig fiber network several years ago, hence us being called the Gig City. So we've been utilizing that to do a lot of the connectivity aspect of what we've been working on. But in deployment at the actual intersections for CAV and AV type technologies, the state here has kind of edicted initially that we look at DSRC, dedicated short range communications. That is a kind of a distant thought process now, and we're now being required to do a dual application at each of our intersections that can either perform with the SRC or some sort of cellular application. So most of the deployments that we've done up to this point are the dual technology, so that we have that capacity for not only the vehicle to be able to communicate back or to the infrastructure, but have the infrastructure communicate back to the vehicle. We have several locations in our downtown test bed now where we're doing the SPAT information, signal phasing and timing, to relate those types of instances back and forth between the vehicle and the infrastructure in a test basis. We're starting to look at some of the basic safety messages and what types of applications that we can apply to them, such as situational awareness for pedestrians and bicyclists within the corridor, those types of things. So we recognize that the cellular connectivity is probably going to be the pathway forward on a lot of this. And so we're starting to devote more of our resources towards that as we move forward.
Wonderful. I'll go back to Jim to get his perspective on this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. It's interesting listening to some of what Kevin was playing through there. And I guess we're a little bit different from some of that, I guess, as a business. So, you know, we're, as I mentioned earlier on, we're a connected vehicle vendor. And I guess from some of that playthrough and where we sort of come in is that we are providing data sort of a V to N, so it's vehicle to network, so to your traffic management center, those kind of things at this current point in time. So essentially, if you could imagine that there is connectivity from the vehicle based on, here's a cellular connection, it's through 4G, 5G, and that is transmitted into our partner OEM's cloud, where we're able to pick up that information that we're have an agreement to collect, shall we say, and pass that on to our customers. And that could be in near real time, ultimately, of a sub 60-second latency to support a plethora of use cases in that way. I guess the benefits of this, then, there is no aftermarket device or anything of that nature that needs to be implemented to understand the information that we can provide. So that would be speeds, very accurate location information, harsh braking, harsh acceleration around sort of safety applications, I guess, in that regard. So key fundamental here is that there is no aftermarket device needed to be implemented in the vehicle. There's no localized infrastructure to obtain the information from the vehicle to the network, let's say. But I guess the considerations here would be in terms of potentially, and particularly depending on which way our partner would want to go, infrastructure of a different kind, cloud infrastructure, the tools that are required to ingest and process data of that kind to make meaningful insight. So this was sort of something that I touched on in some of my intro, that Wejo understands that not all agencies or all conversations that we have will end up at that point in near real-time data streamed to a cloud infrastructure. This is where we've sort of got solutions then based off, the work that I do, our great product team does, or our team in general, sort of making it into sort of more manageable, digestible formats, whether that be in aggregate formats, whether that be in platforms as a service, those kind of things. So I think the considerations from our perspective would be more in terms of infrastructure of a different kind, potentially, depending on which way our partner may want to go with the data. But key benefits here is it's real world vehicles, it's not fleet vehicles, there's no aftermarket device, shall we say. So that's some things for consideration in the benefits.
And Megan, if you have anything to add there about what you guys are up to and whether you're using, in-road or on-vehicle infrastructure or just network connectivity or both.
Sure. So we are in the beta district. We're focusing on applications that improve both mobility and safety. And we see V2X as a means to improve safety by trying to minimize the impacts of driver error after many years of investment to make roads safer. This is a means to get us closer to a goal of Vision Zero, which is where we have no motoring deaths for Ohioans. And also, there's a lot that we're focusing on with respect to pedestrian safety. There's been a regional and national uptick in pedestrian-related fatalities. That's not acceptable. And using V2X technologies are allowing us to deploy safety applications that are focused on providing driver warnings of pedestrians, whether that's at mid-block crossings, at signalized intersection, ped crossings, or at uncontrolled pedestrian areas in our downtown area. So from a mobility standpoint, the safety applications we're deploying also help reduce non-reoccurring congestion, such as accidents and secondary crashes, which is the main reason for congestion. And in Dublin, we also have partners deploying V2X technologies to allow for city staff to better understand the operation of roundabouts, for which we're well known in the area.
Thank you. Yeah. One of the things that I think is really interesting in this space is vulnerable road users, and Kevin and Megan both have talked about those. And so I want to kind of dig in on that a little bit. There's a lot of edge detection and processing that's going on at the intersection. And of course, the municipalities own that intersection that can inform vehicles, right, about the situational awareness of what's happening around that intersection and any VRUs or vulnerable road users that might be in the path of a vehicle. So can you just talk about why this is important in particular, and kind of what are the biggest challenges that you've come across in accurately detecting those and communicating them accordingly? I'm sorry, and I'm gonna start first with Kevin on this one.
Thanks, Tyler. It's a broad subject, and a couple of the different things that we're trying to do to try to accomplish this is that the traffic signal system, the infrastructure itself, may not always be aware that there's a pedestrian or a bicyclist, particularly in the urban core. One of the things that we've seen here through our tracking of crash statistics and stuff is that pedestrians are 23 times more likely to be fatally injured in a crash as a motorist is. That's a dynamic we can't accept any longer. So what we've been trying to work on is looking at other types of technologies to deploy that are more accurate in their assessment of where pedestrians are. One of those detection modes is LiDAR. By triangulating a view of the intersection, we can identify individuals as they're passing through the intersection space accurately, far more accurately than a video solution, but it helps us to understand exactly where that pedestrian or bicyclist would be. It tracks their movement. And in theory, as I mentioned earlier with the SPAT information, if we begin to develop those algorithms out where we could potentially deploy some sort of collision avoidance warning to a vehicle, or just identify that there is a pedestrian present to a vehicle, we could help mitigate some of those crashes.
And Megan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, of course. I would just add that, when we deal with edge detection for pedestrians in urban environments, understanding what the pedestrian is going to do is obviously a challenge because we can't control their movements. So as a public infrastructure owner and operator, we need to think outside of the box on how to improve the safety of vulnerable road users. And this is an area where every second counts and every second can save lives. So it's really important. It means that edge analytics needs to have predictive features, which can be both costly and questionable on the accuracy, as has been mentioned. We rely on third-party solution providers that have invested a significant amount of R&D into these technologies to develop the best solutions. We recognize that there's still a learning curve and some value to continue to refine the capabilities and analytics from machine learning, but we're seeing on the testing that we're doing, we're really seeing some amazing work and a lot of exciting advancements in this area, which are very positive.
Thanks, Megan. I think that brings up an interesting question as to how much expertise should or is in-house at a municipality versus, the private sector in this space. And we'll come back to that, but I think that's really interesting. Jim, a question for you, and I'll probably get to most of the panelists with this as well, but what is the biggest challenge to scaling these applications? I think the industry is at a point where almost everyone is piloting something, right? But to get to real scale, especially on the vehicle side, what are you guys doing, and what do you see as the challenges to doing that well?
Yeah, I think some of the interesting thoughts tie back to some of the previous question, I guess, as well, in terms of, amount of infrastructure that's required, and, technologies, LiDAR technologies, detection, absolutely fantastic and very, very vital in areas within cities, etc. But I guess from Wejo's view is we're giving inferment on what those incidents may look like in very, very, very broad areas of the network, shall we say. So we have coverage on up to 95% of the total US road network. That means for areas that have had less investment potentially in terms of infrastructure, localized, those kind of things that can identify these issues can be supported in a broader way, shall we say. So imagine the ability to understand harsh braking, harsh acceleration events that through some of our work with some of our university partners like Purdue are identifying sort of an area where an incident may occur. So the magic number from some of their study is around 147 hard braking events to an incident, let's say. Now, the idea there is if you look at that across broad networks at county level, state level, etc., then you can start to see that picture in a broader view to then implement additional safety measures or additional, should we say, infrastructure to monitor that and use your resources even more, should we say, accordingly in that way, should we say. The next piece then ultimately is in terms of, the scale of what our data can provide in relation to that. So vast amounts of coverage, as I've said, the ability to understand speeds and to your point earlier on, Megan, you were describing sort of a incident, secondary incident. So our data is already being used by some of our partners to slash response times and secondary incidents in minutes, essentially, based on the near real time, the accuracy of the data, essentially. And that is through platforms, into a traffic management center, straight to the network, shall we say, rather than in a local nature at this point, shall we say, as well. So I guess that gives some sort of consideration in terms of that there is a no-dig approach, shall we say, for a connected vehicle vendor. It's providing a broad view, an inferment of areas where you would want to put additional infrastructure to drill down further. And that could be one approach, essentially, in this way.
Love it. Yeah, thanks, Jim. And Megan, I'd be curious to hear your perspective, right, in the beta district, also in your city, or in jurisdictions just generally in Ohio. What do you see as kind of the biggest challenges to scaling what you're working on in the beta district?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge is, you really need an all-in approach with both the public and the private sectors and all of the partners. So I mentioned a lot of the partners in the beta district. It's taken a lot of work, a lot of collaboration, a lot of negotiations between the Council of Government members, the state of Ohio, and the various entities at the state level, and then also at the federal level. And then with our private partners, Honda, we have 3 cities, the county. It's just really taken an all-in attitude and approach to move forward in a positive direction. I think the other thing is funding. We need to invest more in the technology, but also we need to continue maintaining all the budgets that are necessary to maintain the existing infrastructure that we're responsible for within or throughout the entire beta district. So I just think it's that all-in, attitude and approach, as well as, funding is always a challenge.
Yeah, building support amongst a big group of stakeholders that don't all share the same interest is always a challenge. So I feel you there. Kevin, from your perspective, do you have anything else to add on additional challenges to scaling what you're doing there in Chattanooga?
Well, in Chattanooga, we've got a bit more of a granular approach to this, and scalability it was one of the outputs that we're looking for. we're trying to do these smaller test areas and research the infrastructure, research the understanding of the technologies that we're deploying, what their implications are, and what their data streams provide, so that we can kind of better plan as we move forward. We've been pretty fortunate. We've got a collaborative here where the community has kind of come together and looked at this from a not only from an economic development perspective, but as an investment into our future. Everybody knows that connected and autonomous vehicles are coming. It's just when. And so we're making that investment in trying to get these systems upgraded to the best of our ability currently at a very granular level. To kind of bring up 2 points that both James and Megan have kind of touched on. Data is a new currency for us in a sense. There's a ton of data coming in from these resources, and it's, we're applying some of the best minds that we've got through our National Laboratory Association and through our university connections to kind of make sense of what it is we're seeing. I'm a traffic guy. I've been a traffic guy for 40 years. So, there's limited resources here with me personally, but I know that there's connectivity and a use case that comes out of the back end of this, that it'll be a well thought out plan. It'll be replicable and scalable across our community and across the country if needed. So those are kind of the focal points that we're trying to concentrate on to some sense, is to have a universality of what we're doing and have it be applicable anywhere.
Love it. So I'm going to go back to one question I prompted earlier, and that is, what sort of capacity do you think is needed to be built within government versus in the private sector, right? I mean, governments are used to building, operating, maintaining roadways, not necessarily evolving with how fast the pace of connected vehicle technology is, or being app developers or data analysts. And so I'm going to start actually first with Megan and get your thoughts on, how the jurisdictions in the Beta District or in Ohio generally are thinking about like internal capacity versus what you partner on the private sector with.
Certainly, that's an interesting topic. And I would say, the state of Ohio, as well as the municipalities, counties within the Beta District, have all taken a hard look at that and have made some organizational and operational changes and adjustments to make sure that we're situated to be leaders in this area. So, for example, in the city of Dublin, we created a brand new division of transportation and mobility. And one of the primary functions of that division and the staff within that division is smart mobility and smart cities initiative. So that's one step that we have taken, which is paying off, and we have dedicated staff. We're fortunate that we have the resources to dedicate staff to this area, and that staff is also challenged and tasked with working with our private sector smart mobility partners, which is really cool. So we're able to, partner and leverage all the research and development that those private sector companies and also our academia partners, we leverage all the research and work that academia is doing in this area as well. So we've definitely made some adjustments and are being forward thinking in the way that we allocate our resources. And then another example at the state level, which really set a lot of the momentum in motion around the state of Ohio, the state Department of Transportation, they spun off an entity called Drive Ohio, and that organization and staff is dedicated to furthering and advancing smart mobility around the state. So that really set in motion the mindset throughout the state that this is an area that we need to focus on and dedicate sufficient resources towards advancing.
That's great. Thank you. And Jim, I'd actually like to hear kind of from the private sector perspective, where you see the lanes between public and private. I know you work a lot with government stakeholders across the country. What's your perspective on this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does vary wildly from agency to agency, essentially, and things are in terms of technology adoption can be different, and budget can be different. All that kind of thing, all that kind of good stuff. Ultimately, so Wejo has had to devise ways of making data more available. I think there's a piece in what Kevin discussed as well. There's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of data silos already, and Wejo works in terms of, if you have already got a GIS team, you want to use it with data through GIS, great stuff. We can make that work that way. You want it to go into traffic management center in a live stream, yes, we can do that. So we've learned to be very adaptable to fit both in technical ability, our support versus the ability that is within the local jurisdiction that we'll be working with. And I guess the ultimate thing here is the use cases typically are always the same. Safety, you mentioned it earlier on, Megan, Vision Zero, absolutely, fundamental importance. I guess my part of my statement of that would be, it doesn't end at the freeway or the interstate Vision Zero. It's, the majority of incidents may well happen in sort of your residential, lesser covered or monitored areas of the road network, and Wejo does not remove that information. In fact, we make that readily available through various products and services, shall we say. So not only is it the understanding of volumes, which is something that, traffic counts, etc., is not something new to anybody in the industry, but if you look at that from actual clock speeds of vehicles from the head units in conjunction with seatbelt latches, unlatches, in conjunction with harsh braking, and also in conjunction with weather status, let's say, so wipers, weather condition, ambient air temperature, all that kind of good stuff. You can get more of a profile over a broader network and see more of it. So I think to come back to your question, really, Tyler, it's a case of there is still a way to go for all agencies to be able to fully adopt the benefits. And the benefits are absolutely massive in terms of Vision Zero on a large scale, particularly from our perspective. And Wejo is working from the other direction to make it more and more accessible through source data, through aggregate data, or through our platforms and services that we offer as well. So yeah, the key piece in this is ultimately we're working in the opposite direction to make it more and more accessible to our potential partners to supporting use cases around Vision Zero. Absolutely. So,
thank you. Any final thoughts on that question, Kevin, from you? I know you guys are doing a lot in the space, and I'm sure you've run into this question often of whether you need to hire or what you lean on other parties to do.
We're fortunate. We have some 2,000 PhD doctoral people at Oak Ridge that we work with, and another 200 at the university here. As far as that's concerned, my staff is probably getting trained by the best minds in the country. None of which, any of us are doctoral type people. So we're getting the education, we're getting the training on the devices, the technologies, the use cases, on how to deploy these things and how to manage these things long term to provide the results that we're looking for. So it's a fortunate thing that we have. We recognize through our efforts for the past 4 years that there are probably going to be some restructuring activities, one of which is that my group, the Smart Cities Division, formerly in the Department of Transportation here at the city, has now moved to the IT department as part of their initiative moving forward. They're helping us to manage more of the smart cities perspective than just solely basing it on transportation. So that's one thing that's evolved from this whole process. But we see these types of things continuing as we touch across different communities, different departments across the city, the different service requests and things that we need to be able to provide to our citizens.
Wonderful. Well, with just a few minutes left, I just want to wrap up with some closing remarks from each of you as to, what you think is important for the future of this industry that maybe we haven't talked about yet. And I'm gonna actually go back to Megan and see what final thoughts you have for the audience.
Sure. So I can't say it enough. I really think, and we've hit on it within every question, I believe it's the partnerships and the relationships between public and private sector. I mean, we each have our roles and we have our specialties. And as long as we work together and are forward thinking and have great intentions, which we all do, I think great things are to come.
Jim.
Yeah, I think I'd reiterate some of the points that I've made throughout the session today, sort of the benefits in terms of broad network coverage with many, many different attributes associated directly to vehicles gives interesting dynamic and new slant to some of the work that the team here may be working on as well, essentially, and for some of the audience that we talk about here. But ultimately, core part of Wejo is data for good, the idea that we're making data more readily available to support in use cases, particularly around Vision Zero. We're road users too, like everybody else on this call, essentially. So the ultimate goal here is for Wejo is to get data into hands and make decisions and sort of solve those problems in terms of emissions, congestion, road safety, all that kind of good stuff as well under our umbrella of our remit of work. So yeah, that's ultimately it for me.
Kevin.
Yeah, I have kind of two basic thoughts. The first is we need to just kind of establish some governance over the data and the data usage. We have different pools of data. We have the static stuff that we get that we store and historical data and all those sorts of paradigms. But we also have streaming data that we need to manage and make decisions based on real time as part of our processes as we move forward in this space. Okay. So the second thought process, or the second priority that I think that we need to think about, is the universality of these applications. As we begin to deploy connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles across the country, we're going to need to make sure that they all work within each other's environments and ecosystems. There's going to need to be some sort of standardization pretty soon on how we approach this and start to build those libraries of data and the types of data and the formats that we need to be able to make those types of decisions as we move forward. We don't want to create an environment where things that work in Ohio don't work in Tennessee or in California or in New York. We want to make sure that there's a universality to how these things are implemented.
Thank you. I think today we've talked about a number of unique perspectives on the connected vehicle industry and the need for better vehicle to infrastructure connectivity. So thank you to all of our panelists for your time today. This brings our session to a close. And, thank you all very much for your time. Luke.
Super. Thank you, Tyler. Really, really well moderated, and a big thank you to the panel. Some great points raised by each of you. So thank you very much. To our audience, we're going to take a quick break of about 5-10 minutes, and we'll keep the infrastructure theme, but looking more to ITS. So stay tuned and see you shortly. Thank you.